Museum. I'm Ami Eckard-Lee, the collections manager, and I'm here to give you a little tour of our Curtiss-Wright Travel Air 12W biplane. It's quite a mouthful of a name. It's because one company bought another company, but then they kept both names. We just call it the 12W. Anyway, it's a slightly smaller biplane than the other biplanes that we've shown you in previous tours, and I want to explain why and kind of go around the plane and show some cool parts of this plane and its history and stuff like that. So let's go. So this airplane was built in 1932. What else was going on in 1932? The Great Depression. So America had been airplane crazy since 1927 when Charles Lindbergh flew the Atlantic. He was the first guy to do that. Everybody was obsessed. But then along came 1929 and the stock market crashed and things were tougher and people couldn't afford a private airplane. Like the other airplanes that I've shown you in previous tours, for example, our Stearman, those would cost about $8,000 in 1929. That's a lot of money even today. An airplane like this 12W, it only cost $4,500 roughly. So it's a lot cheaper, a lot easier for an average person struggling to think of purchasing an airplane like this. Why is it cheaper? Well, first of all, the engine. It's a lot smaller, and it's also a lot more economical. It only burns about half the gas as an engine on a larger plane like the Stearman would. Another reason that this airplane is a little more economical is it only has space for 2 people to ride in it. A bigger biplane would have the pilot's cockpit back here, and then up front a wider cockpit where up to 2 passengers could sit. This airplane only has 2 places, so cockpit in the back for the pilot, and then small cockpit up front where 1 passenger could sit. So this airplane is dimensionally, physically, a lot smaller than the big Stearman and other big biplanes. It is maybe 20 to 30% lighter, so it doesn't weigh as much, and it is just a cute little tiny little airplane. It's not a mail plane, it's not a working airplane. I mean, it does work, but it's not going to work. Almost overnight, from the 20s to the 30s, there was a huge engineering advancement in aircraft manufacturing. So the airplanes like this from the early 30s, later 30s, they're a lot easier to fly, they're a lot easier to handle. Why? Well, for example, they have new technology like a wheel on the tail. This is called the tail wheel because it's the wheel on the tail. The airplanes of the 20s also had something to keep the tail off the ground, but it wasn't a wheel. It was just a piece of metal called a tail skid, but it didn't roll and it did not steer very well. So this is huge, you guys. I mean, it's a tiny wheel, but it's a huge step for mankind. The front wheels on this airplane are also different. They're smaller. So a biplane in the 20s would almost always be landing on a grass runway or even just a field. By the time the 30s rolled around and this airplane was built, airplanes were a lot more common, and so there were actual airports, and a lot of them had paved runways now. And smaller wheels are easier to land on pavement, and they handle a little better. They make landing a little easier. So that's why these wheels are smaller. They also have nicer brakes than airplanes in the 20s. They're a little more sophisticated. Thanks, engineers. There were only 12 of this model aircraft produced, and the history of this particular plane is super cool and wacky and kind of typical of the crazy stuff that happened in the early days of aviation. In the 30s and 40s, we don't know where this plane was, but by the 50s, it was in Minnesota and owned by a farmer. And one day, this farmer took off out of his farm, and his airplane ran out of gas. So he tried to glide back to his farm and land in his fields, but he didn't quite make it, and he crashed the plane into his neighbor's yard and directly into his neighbor's chicken coop. So imagine it like literally like in a movie, chicken feathers flying and chickens squawking and running out of the way. The airplane was a little crashed up in the front, but the farmer was fine. And he got out of his plane and his neighbor was not very happy. And his neighbor said, "I want $100 for the damage that you did before you can remove the airplane." And the farmer, for reasons unknown to us, said, "No, okay, keep it." And he just walked away. So the airplane stayed in the chicken coop for decades. I noticed this gauge that tells you how much gas you've got in your tank, and there's this red zone that says no take off. And that means that you're kind of close to empty. And I'm wondering if the farmer saw that before he crashed and ran out of gas, or if this is like a new gas gauge that they put in afterwards so no one would repeat that mistake. I don't know. So the next part of the story. How did the airplane get to be in beautiful restored condition in our museum? Okay, so in the 80s, our founder of the Kelch Aviation Museum, Al Kelch, He wanted one of these. There were only 12 made, they're special, they're beautiful. He wanted to have one, he wanted to restore one. None existed. So he started kind of looking around, and an airplane buddy of his at the time had known the farmer who owned this and crashed it into the chicken coop. So this airplane dude went out to Minnesota, and he found the farm, and he found the neighbor, and he found the chicken coop, and he found the airplane. And he said to the farmer, I'd like to buy this thing. And the farmer said, I'm still waiting for my $100 for the damage. So they paid him $100, and they took it away. Now, it was in pretty rough condition. It had been sitting outside in a chicken coop, but a crashed chicken coop, for decades. All the wood and all the fabric had rotted away, fallen apart, so it was just the metal pieces. Hold on, little important fact. Al Kelch made his fortune as a pioneer in injection molded plastics, which is a really fancy way of saying that he invented the machine that spits these orange cones out and other things like that. So, thanks, Al. Back to our story. Al said to his airplane buddy, great, you found a 12W, I want it, how can I pay you for that airplane that I've always wanted? And the airplane buddy said, actually, we need a lot of orange traffic cones, how about a trade? So, this plane is here because of orange traffic cones. And Al restored it, and then it flew, and it flies a lot. In fact, it's the airplane that we fly the most here at Kelch. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of our beautiful 12W, and I hope you'll come and see it in person when we open the doors to the museum in 2021, hopefully. I look forward to seeing you there. In the meantime, check out our website, check out our Facebook page or our Instagram. We love hearing from you, so if there's an airplane you want to learn about or something about aviation history that you want to learn about, please let us know, and I'd be happy to make a video. And also, consider donating to Kelch Aviation Museum this holiday season. We rely on wonderful fundraising support from people like you. So, see you next year. I think it's already December. Okay, that's gonna be Pat's favorite take, because I'm stupid.